It was one of the largest and deadliest battles of the Great War, resulting in nearly 1 million deaths. In the summer of 1916, the British and French forces began a massive offensive that would later become known as the Battle of the Somme. It remained as the epitome of the atrocities associated with trench warfare.
It really was quite extraordinary, in that it gained so little but cost so much.
This and more tonight on 10 Minutes. The Great War occurred from 1914 to 1918. The Battle of the Somme officially began on July 1st, 1916, during the year of attrition, but military actions and plans occurred prior to that date. The original purpose of the Battle of the Somme was to hold a massive offensive to push the German lines backwards, but these plans were altered due to the German offensive at the Battle of Verdun. The plan for the Somme originally intended the fighting to begin in August, but the date was moved forward in order to relieve the Allies fighting in Verdun. There, the Allies had suffered a number of defeats, so the Allies decided to attack the German line north of Verdun, so that the Germans would have to move troops in order to stay well defended. Thus, instead of delivering the crippling blow to the German defenses as originally intended, the primary objective of the Battle of the Somme was to relieve Allied forces in Verdun.
The fighting took place in the western theater of the Great War along the French front. The Somme River runs in the north of France, as seen here. The fighting took place in northern and southern areas. The British planned to attack on a 20-kilometer front near Serre, north of Ancre, and Curlu, north of the Somme. 5 French divisions would attack a 13-kilometer front south of the Somme between Curlu and Péronne.
Before the initial attack, the Allies bombarded the German line with artillery for 7 days straight, beginning on June 24th, 1916.
This bombardment tactic is what's known as rolling barrage, and it was usually used in conjunction with the up and over technique. And so the Allied forces absolutely pounded the German trenches for a whole week, the scale of which had never been seen before in modern warfare. They used nearly 1.7 million shells, and the bombing could be heard across the English Channel.
But the bombardment was unsuccessful in destroying German trench fortifications because many of the shells were poorly constructed and did not explode upon landing. After the week-long bombardment, British troops were ordered to go up and over and advance through no man's land towards the German trenches on July 1st, 1916.
Heavy artillery was largely ineffective because the German soldiers simply hid in dugouts underground. The artillery failed to destroy many barbed wire lines and the heavily fortified German bunkers. In fact, farmers today are still digging up some of these useless shells.
Confident that the artillery strike had crippled the German line, newly appointed British Commander-in-Chief Sir Douglas Haig called for a large infantry advance on July 1st. Haig ordered the northern wing, led by Sir Henry Rawlinson's Fourth Army and comprised of mostly British troops, to attempt a complete breakthrough of German lines, with cavalry standing by to exploit the resulting gap. The southern wing, led by General Rawlinson, was comprised of mostly French forces and was instructed to make a limited advance. In the northern wing of the battle, a force advanced through no man's land to the German front, where they were met with German machine gun fire.
The intended use of cavalry shows just how backwards the military thinking was back then. The British military faith was still being placed in cavalry, even though the nature of war had changed so that it was no longer viable.
British troops walked slowly towards the line, expecting little to no opposition. They made for incredibly easy targets for the German machine gunners. On this historic first day of the battle, the British suffered 57,470 casualties. The northern divisions made no progress on the first day and suffered tremendous losses, but Haig continued the offensive for the following days. Some advances were made, but they were insignificant and did not break the German line. George Coppard, a machine gunner at the Battle of the Somme, said, "The next morning, we gunners surveyed the dreadful scene in front of us. It became clear that the Germans had always had a commanding view of no man's land. The British attack had been brutally repulsed. Hundreds of dead were strung out like wreckage washed up to a high water mark. Quite as many died on the enemy wire as on the ground, like fish caught in a net. They hung there in grotesque postures. Some looked as if they were praying. They had died on their knees, and the wire had prevented their fall. Machine gun fire had done its terrible work.
The southern advancement was really the only part of the initial advancement that had any measurable success. The divisions in the south used different tactics than Haig did in the north. They bombarded the German line just a few hours before the advancement so that the element of surprise would still be in their favor. Furthermore, the French troops advanced in small groups rather than all at once that resulted in the staggering number of casualties the British experienced. It also helped that the German Army Chief of Staff von Falkenhayn did not expect the French to attack after the losses the French suffered in the Battle of Verdun. Success is not something usually associated with the French military, but it is applicable here. You can read this more in depth in my book.
By July 10th, French forces had advanced 6 miles and had captured the Fleucourt Plateau and 12,000 prisoners.
On July 11th, Rawlinson's forces finally secured the first line of German defenses, but were unable to break through. As a result, Germans began to move troops from Verdun to the Somme. The German offensive ended there, and the Allies achieved their primary goal.
On July 13, 1916, the British launched a night attack against German positions along a 3.5-mile portion of the Somme front. After advancing nearly 1,000 yards, the advance was halted by the Germans. 2 days later, the British once again penetrated the German line and advanced to High Wood, but were then pushed back.
Small advancements like these were characteristic of the Battle of the Somme. They made marginal gains for great cost. In fact, it was determined that for every inch of land that was gained in the battle, 1.5 casualties were experienced. It made people on the home front question if the lives lost was worth such an insignificant gain, and it pointed to the futility of trench warfare.
The Battle of Somme quickly became what is known as attritional, which means that it was wasteful and destructive.
On July 19th, German forces were recognized with von Below shifting to First Army in the north and General Max von Gallwitz taking over the Second Army in the south. In addition, von Gallwitz was made an army group commander with responsibility for the entire Somme front.
After July 1st, that a long stalemate settled in. For weeks, the fighting was at a standstill. Haig's offensive remained, but little to no progress was made.
On September 15th, Haig renewed the offensive in order to break the stalemate with an attack with 11 divisions. This offensive brought the debut of the tank in warfare. The new weapon proved effective in that it helped the British troops advance 2,000 yards. However, the new technology proved to be unreliable.
The tank, while effective, had many issues. For example, they had many mechanical breakdowns. Their armor could not withstand heavy artillery, and because they were so slow, they were easy targets. The number of tanks in the battle started at 50, but because of mechanical issues, it was reduced to 24.
Similar to the rest of the battle, the British were able to advance into German defenses, but were unable to fully penetrate the German line.
Entering the battle on a large scale, Gau's reserve army began a major offensive on September 26th and succeeded in taking Thiepval. Elsewhere on the front, Haig, believing a breakthrough was near, pushed forces towards Le Transloy and Le Sars with little effect. With winter approaching, Haig initiated the final phase of the Somme offensive on November 13th with an attack along the Anker River to the north of Thiepval. While assaults near Serre failed completely, attacks to the south succeeded in taking Beaumont, Hamel, and achieving their objectives. A final attack was made on the German defensives on November 18th, effectively ending the campaign. The oncoming winter put a stop to a campaign.
The costs of the Battle of the Somme were extraordinary. There were over 420,000 British casualties, 200,000 French casualties, and about 500,000 German casualties. Haig's conduct of the battle caused much controversy. Critics argued that his inflexible approach merely repeated flawed tactics. The Allies can only claim success and victory through the small amount of land gained and relieving the French at Verdun.
This battle was very important to the Great War. It resulted in a huge amount of casualties and came to epitomize the horrors of trench warfare.